Hello everybody, and welcome to this really exciting session that we have this afternoon here at the Research Forum. My name's Wandel. I'm the Chief Executive of SAFECOM, the South Australian Fire and Emergency Services Commission, and I'm just so excited to be here today looking out at all of these faces, and I've heard such wonderful things about the forum already, and again, just huge congratulations to the NHRA team. You do such an amazing job, and to kind of keep so much intellectual capital in the room, to give so many people voices, to give research such a wonderful platform. I just want to put my hands together for all of you. I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the Kaurna country and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging on this land that has never been ceded. As I mentioned, I'm the Chief Executive of SAFECOM. For those that don't know much about SAFECOM, we provide unifying support for emergency services in South Australia. We lead on disaster risk reduction and resilience, and also provide corporate support to the CFS, the SES and the MFS in this state. I'm really excited about this very special session here today, which is featuring several of Australia's foundational voices in natural hazards research. This session is being live streamed, and there will be an opportunity for questions towards the end of the panel discussion. So as you have been doing throughout this wonderful forum, please do jump online, pop those questions in, because I'm just so delighted about the people that we have here today. Between the 6 people up on this stage, there is an extraordinary depth of knowledge and experience, and it's something that I just am so looking forward to hopefully grabbing and putting in my mind so we can apply it to work. So really delighted. I'll introduce them briefly before we get into the panel, and I'm not sure if we're sitting in order, so when I say your name, just give a bit of a wave. So Dr. Greg Ayers is a distinguished leader in atmospheric science who has held the highest positions in Australian meteorology, serving as Director of Meteorology and CEO of the Bureau of Meteorology, and previously as Chief of Marine and Atmospheric Research at CSIRO. Emeritus Professor Russell Blong has spent more than 50 years researching natural hazards across the Asia-Pacific, with a particular focus on Australia and Papua New Guinea. In 1994, he founded Risk Frontiers at Macquarie University, and subsequently spent nearly 2 decades consulting to the insurance sector on natural hazard risk. Naomi Brown has provided national leadership across the sector as CEO of AFAC from 2006 to 2012, and before AFAC, Naomi held several executive roles at the Country Fire Authority in Victoria and at the Fire Emergency Services Authority of WA. Emeritus Professor John Handmer is a human geographer and lawyer who has worked on disaster risk reduction for more than 5 decades. Now based with the Equity and Justice Group at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis in Vienna, and an Emeritus Professor at RMIT and Fellow of the Australian Academy of Social Sciences. Dr. Debra Parkinson has fundamentally reshaped understanding of the gendered dimensions of disaster in Australia and internationally. Her PhD research into domestic violence following the 2009 Black Saturday bushfires transformed this field of inquiry, along with founding the Gender and Disaster Pod and Gender and Disaster Australia. David Windsor is a Kororeg man from the Kariri Island in Zendesketh in the Torres Strait, and the Cultural Fire and Partnerships Coordinator at the Bushfire Centre of Excellence within DFES, WA, and a member of the Centre's First Nations Pathways Working Group. Holy moly, what a group of people. If there is ever a group of people to keep us pumped up between 4 till 5:30, I think this is it. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for coming along today. So the way that this panel is kind of going to work is it's split into 2. So we're going to have one first question where we'll get the wonderful panellists to kind of give us their insights, and then I'm going to follow up with an additional question to really kind of test them. So we're very excited it's the one you know about, so don't worry too much, unless I decide to get a little bit spicy and go rogue, which is not my style, so I think you're safe. And we'll probably have about 5 minutes each for each answer, and feel free to jump in if there's something that you want to add, and we'll really kind of get to the bottom of some of these big issues that we've got. So I think I might start with Greg, because you're sitting on the end there. What I'm really keen to ask this group is, looking back at these incredible distinguished careers that we have just heard about, I want to know what stands out to you as a truly fundamental moment. And that might be a catastrophic event, a research breakthrough, it could be a policy intervention that acted as a genuine catalyst in shaping Australia's natural hazard capability. What did that moment or catastrophic event set in motion? What can we trace back to it today? So, Greg, over to you.
Very good. Thank you. On the 30th of January 2011, Cyclone Anthony crossed the coast near Bowen in Queensland. It wasn't too much damage, it was Category 2. On the same day, a tropical low was forming out in the Coral Sea area near Fiji. It deepened very quickly, headed straight for the coast, and it hit the coast on the 3rd of February, just 4 days later, as a Category 5 Cyclone Yasi, which did an enormous amount of damage. It was very destructive. Storm surge on the southern side, rain, wind. As if that wasn't enough, in less than 2 weeks from that period, another tropical low formed over Darwin, parked over it for a day or so, flooded the place, became a Category 1 cyclone, Cyclone Carlos. It wobbled around a bit, then moved off down the coast in Western Australia, picked up some more moisture and heat from the ocean surface near Karratha, and went across the Pilbara as a Cat 2 and did significant damage. As if that wasn't enough, less than 2 weeks after that, on the east coast of Japan, the Tohoku earthquake occurred. The Fukushima nuclear power plant was badly damaged, and there was a tsunami warning all around the Pacific. So here am I sitting in the director's chair in less than 2 months, 4 natural disasters. What did I learn from all this? Something that we've all known, and we know even now, that in fact we have to be prepared. The whole ecosystem of emergency management has to be prepped for multiple, recurrent, different natural disasters. And as we go forward, with climate change making the weather more energetic, and population growing, so there are more people to be put in harm's way, the risk is just increasing. So that's point number 1 I took from it. Point number 2 I took from that experience was that the ecosystem itself faces 2 fundamental issues because it is so complicated. There are so many agencies, business groups, levels of policy and political work, local, regional, state, and so on. And the 2 issues that really make life difficult for putting it all together are what I'll call coordination problem and a cooperation problem. And those 2 wicked problems are things that we need to work on. I did in the case of Yasi. I led from the front in that sense, wanting to coordinate. I got on a plane 3 days before we knew it would hit. Went to Queensland, sat with Anna Bligh and the emergency managers in the Emergency Management Centre. We made sure we were connected and coordinated. And fortunately for the Bureau, I learned that the emergency management folks in Queensland had the only helicopter capable of doing a 1,000-kilometre round trip on 1 tank of fuel out to Willis Island to pick up the 4 Bureau staff that were on that little 100-metre by 300-metre coral atoll with a Bureau automatic weather station and observatory that was our early warning for cyclones coming in. Well, they did that, and they were rescued 1 day before the cyclone hit and demolished all the Bureau measurements. However, that wasn't enough. I'd also spent time with Lieutenant General David Hurley, who was the Vice Chief of Defence Staff, and asked him, because I had a relationship with him, this connection thing again, to send an aircraft out to look at the island and give us enough intelligence so that we were well prepped and able to repair it as quickly as possible to get it back operating. Point number 2. And the third and final thing is, I learned very strongly that we should be adopting whatever is the current best practice science and technology. And I'll throw to Pat. Can you just run those two very short videos for me? The first one is I'd asked the Bureau folks, I wanted to understand how well our forecast for Yasi had done. So I got them stitched together, all the forecasts for every 6 hours, turned it into an animated GIF so that we could do some analysis on how well we'd done. That's Cyclone Yasi, and that's the Bureau's 15-year-old modelling prediction. And this is the Tohoku tsunami, again modelled. This was a collaboration between the Bureau and Geoscience Australia for the Joint Tsunami Warning Centre. You'll see the waves coming out, travelling at 700 kilometres an hour, reflecting off the eastern side of the Pacific, the continents, refracting around islands and all sorts of other things. In fact, some of the reflected waves from the other side didn't hit Australia until 50 or 60 hours afterwards. Anyway, that's it for me. They're the things I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Incredible to see those graphics and the way some of those hazards evolved. I might hand to Russell now around a catastrophic event or a breakthrough from your past. And feel free to stay seated or stand, whatever you're most comfortable.
I'll stay sitting. My natural hazards journey began in a swamp in the highlands of Papua New Guinea in 1970. But I want to skip now for 20 years. At the time I was on the staff of Macquarie University and I was still there even 30 years after that. But in the late 1980s, I won a lottery in that I got an Australian Research Grant Award to study natural hazards. And there were 4 questions in which I was trying to consider. What's the most deadly natural hazard in Australia? What's the most costly natural hazard in Australia? What will be the most deadly natural hazard in Australia? What will be the most costly? And you can tell that I've done really well in answering those 4 questions. But the grant I got was actually quite a big one for those days. It was more than $100,000 a year for 3 years or something, which enabled me to employ a number of research assistants. But my first idea was, look, the insurance industry really ought to be very interested in what I'm doing. Why don't I talk to them about doubling the money? So I went to talk to a few insurance companies and they were not interested at all, which was disappointing. But I went off to a conference in Vancouver, Canada, where I met a guy called Gerhard Bertz, who was probably the #1 natural hazards guy in the insurance industry in the world at the time. He was head of natural hazards in Munich Re in Munich. And he maintained that, yes, they ought to be interested in what I was doing. So when I got back to Australia, I thought, well, I've got a study leave coming up. I will spend it in the insurance industry, finding out a bit more about how they look at natural hazards, etc. So I arranged to spend a few months in the Munich Re office in Sydney. 12 days before I was due to arrive in their office, the Newcastle earthquake occurred. And the timing of that really changed a whole lot of things, because the insurance industry approach to working out what a natural hazard would cost a particular company really involved a couple of senior executives and several bottles of Shiraz. And it worked on a concept usually called probable maximum loss. So they try to work out what their losses might be. And a probable maximum loss for an earthquake like the Newcastle earthquake might be 2 or 3%, remembering that the difference between 2% and 3% might be $500 million. So you're talking big money and expensive Shiraz, to get it right. So I learned quite a lot about the insurance industry, and the important thing was I met a lot of people in the insurance industry in that time in Munich Re, which resulted in a little unknown reinsurance broker called Greg Fester sending out an invitation to all Australian universities for somebody to develop a loss model for what an earthquake in an Australian city might cost. This is after the Newcastle earthquake, remember, which cost a couple of billion. I was the only person that replied to the 19 letters that that company sent out. And as a result, that company funded me to develop a loss model for housing in Sydney from an earthquake of the size of the Newcastle earthquake. And one thing led to another. Luckily, I knew how to develop a loss model because a few years before that, when Rabaul volcano in Papua New Guinea looked as if it was going to erupt, I'd been invited by the Institute of National Affairs in Papua New Guinea to look at what the effects of an eruption of Rabaul volcano would be. Now, a word of advice. If you're going to develop scenarios or build a loss model, make sure that the event is never likely to happen, because you're not going to be right with your answer. Anyway, I developed that model, and that was how I knew how to develop an earthquake model, which ended up being 2 for Sydney, 1 for Melbourne, 1 for Adelaide, 1 for Perth. And as a result of me and my team running out of time, it involved the insurance industry buying me out of teaching and setting up the Natural Hazards Research Centre at Macquarie University, which was only the second time in the world that the industry had really put money into any form of natural hazards research. And over the next 10 years, we had 9 or 10 companies in Australia and overseas putting money into what then became Risk Frontiers, which is still running, started in 1994, still running today as a private company. Let me say, well, that Risk Frontiers was the first company really to develop a working earthquake loss model, which meant the insurance industry for the first time began to appreciate the size of potential losses and also to think about other natural hazards, so that they developed cyclone models as well. And Risk Frontiers went on to develop the first hail loss model in the world, because hail is actually a far more important peril from an insurance industry point of view than earthquake is, and later bushfire flood models, etc. It still goes working mainly, Risk Frontiers mainly works for the insurance industry and is funded by the insurance industry, but it also works for government as well. It really changed the development of Risk Frontiers really changed the attitude of the insurance industry in terms of investigating natural hazards and what they might mean for that industry. Now, I just wanted to read a very small comment that John McInerney, who took over from me as the director of Risk Frontiers in 2003, made on my retirement. And he was talking about the first loss model we built, the one for Rabaul volcano, which we built in about 1988 or so. When the volcano did actually erupt in 1994, it respected none of Russell's erudite analyses and scholarship, erupting in the wrong place with the wrong wind direction and with consequences that had only been partly anticipated. With the benefits of advances in computing power, we can now perform fully probabilistic analyses on a wide range of natural hazards, besides just volcanoes, be wrong many more times and much more efficiently. And that still applies today. And because there's so many people in the natural hazards industry involved in building models, let me end up with one comment. What's not in the model?
Thank you, Russell. Thank you so much, Russell. And I think a lot of us in our work have engaged with Risk Frontiers, so a great legacy that you have there. I might now hand over to Naomi.
Thank you. Let me take you back, if you were around at that stage, or take you to the few days before the 7th of February 2009 in Victoria. It was bloody hot, and the temperatures kept rising, and there had been a drought for many years. All the emergency services right across Australia knew that doom was approaching. There were many meetings and a lot of planning. In Victoria itself, the Premier, everybody from the Premier down, got on TV to say this is, is going to be really bad. So by the time the Saturday came, it was just a matter of waiting to see where it was going to strike, and it turns out that the fires were pretty well everywhere. On that day, there were pretty well countless fires, but some very big ones. 173 people died, 2,000 homes were lost, hundreds of people injured, huge amounts of infrastructure, shops, schools, pretty well the whole of Marysville disappeared, countless native animals and livestock, and massive environmental damage. So to say all hell broke loose is pretty accurate. In terms of looking at what changed, what policy, there were many. And the one I wanted to concentrate on is the infamous stay or go, which the very next day, I think, there was a news circle of hell appeared, and it came by way of the media, who suddenly knew everything there was to know. And what the hell do you think you're thinking? What is this stay or go? And so things got fairly tough of having to say why so many people were injured and why their policy didn't work. There were more circles of hell to come, and I might say the Royal Commission was one of them. So things got fairly tricky there for quite a while. In terms of the policy, it became, obviously there's a lot of introspection, and it was obvious that the policy itself didn't really take into account enough different types of fire, whether you're looking at a grass fire or some massive conflagration, which we happened to have on that day. That we had relied too much on people actually not only having a plan, but knowing what to do and to activate it. Warnings became a huge issue, which is very much part of the trigger of whether you actually do stay and defend or you leave early, which was the proper name for the policy all the time. The other huge problem that was seen on the day, of course, that there were very few, if any, evacuation centres or refuges, and if there were, it was all pretty informal. So from that, once the dust settled, which did take quite some time, it was pretty well recognised, look, there really are only two options. You either stay or you go. But there had to be a lot more work and a lot more nuance in what the messaging was. So what changed very quickly, or the work started very quickly, was on the warning system. And if I had time, I would tell you the story of how the word catastrophic actually got into the lexicon, except, of course, in Victoria, where they had to be different and it was code red. And so that was quite a point of contention. However, the warning system and all the science behind it, I know, has been redone. It was based on 1960s research for a forest fire danger index, which was never meant for anything to do with the community in the first place. And so that was always a bit of a problem. The provision and publication of refuges and evacuation centres really brought in a lot of local governments, and it was a very big recommendation from the Royal Commission also that there be a much broader spread of responsibility, not equal, but everyone had a role. And the local governments certainly had to come in and do a fair bit because it is such a local issue. Prior to that, refuges would often be the beach or an oval. It's just a fabulous story. There was a fire on the Great Ocean Road, and the people evacuated themselves I forget when this was, maybe in the 90s or early 2000s, and of course they all headed for the beach. Unfortunately, so did the kangaroos, the snakes, everything came out of the bush and met everyone in the ocean. So it perhaps was all a bit scary. The information that's given, I think one of the biggest things that happened was that information to the public is much more direct. And in fact, it used to be, activate your fire plan, whatever. It's now, I hear on the radio, I'm from WA, I hear, basically if you don't leave, you're going to die. Now, that is so different to what we probably pussyfooted around. And I can remember we had one education campaign, we were gearing up for summer. This was when I was working in Victoria. The government would not let us say there won't be a fire truck to every house. It didn't sound good. So things moved dramatically, and much better too. So huge change. I think the policy is still controversial, difficult to implement, but there is no other choice.
Sometimes it's incredible to hear how some of these policies are developed behind the scenes. Thank you so much, Naomi. I might hand over to John.
Hello. Yeah. I'm going to talk about a major flood in Lismore. Before I worked in fires, I worked in floods. Sometimes I get a bit confused, but anyway. So this was a record flood in 1974. Yes, and I worked on it. It's pretty scary to think about this. About 2,000 houses and maybe something short of 1,000 businesses were inundated in this event. But it needs to be seen in the context of the time. 1974 was one of those bumper years for disasters and emergencies in Australia. It started with the Brisbane floods, which had national implications, and among other things, 100 or so homes found themselves in different locations after the floodwaters relocated them. Then at the end of the year, we had Cyclone Tracy, which basically trashed over 80% of the housing in Darwin, among other things. And in the meantime, there were lots of floods, cyclones, and even serious bushfires. So that's from the hazard point of view. From the institutional point of view, the federal government established the first, or the Australia's national disaster emergency management or disaster organisation, the NDO, the so-called Natural Disasters Organisation. Itself full of controversy about the name, but let's leave it for the moment. You'll get lots of stories if you look it up. We're not meant to do any anecdotes, but a side issue is that a few days ago, I'm pretty sure it was Albo, maybe it wasn't, so all deference here, made a statement that his government had set up Australia's first National Emergency Management Agency. Sorry, that was in February 1974. All the organisations with emergency management responsibilities at that time in the 70s, especially in 74, were shifting from a war focus to a civilian emergency management focus. So it's not very easy to say this particular flood led to this particular result, because there was so much happening, and there was a lot of research for the Times on the Lismore flood done through the local College of Advanced Education, as it was called then. Northern Rivers became Southern Cross University, and I was at ANU. There was I wasn't at ANU a few years later, but only a few years later. So what we found was, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what we found, and then the big changes that occurred as a result, partly as a result of the flood. The people in the floodplain, of which are many thousands of people, many had their own strategies to reduce losses. It was pretty informal, and a lot of what they did, they wouldn't be allowed to do today. For example, maybe I'm not judging it, but a lot of people would go back to their houses at the peak of the flood and just walk around the house as the flood waters went to stir up all the mud so the house was basically clean afterwards. There's all those sorts of things. It became clear to us that many people in the floodplain were there because they had no choice. Didn't want to be there. especially people who were a bit elderly or otherwise impaired, because you had to climb multiple stairs to get to your house often. Some houses at that stage were still in swamps, because if you looked at old maps, you could see the swamps marked, but these were renamed and then they became residential areas. But the floodwaters are very deep. The flooding drew the attention of the authorities to the extent of the flood exposure problem. There was also extremes, but I don't have time to talk about that. We just look at exposure. And there was a lot of dubious activities going on, which also helped focus the minds of the officials, which, for example, one local government up there, not the Lismore one, was busy approving as fast as it could floodplain development for its mates and developers, because they could see that some regulation was coming. The responsible state agency should have been planning, but they had other priorities. And so it fell to the all-powerful, in those days, engineering division group, the Public Works Department. They developed and issued flood planning circulars about flood-prone land through the planning department while the planners were on holiday, literally. These set out the desirability of avoiding development in the floodplain. That was defined as a 100-year event, by the 100-year event, and specified, and this is what caused a little more trouble, that development in floodways should be removed, ideally. And that was defined as a 20-year flood. The difficulty caused a bit of angst because some of the western towns of western New South Wales are entirely within the 20-year flood zone. So that was, people got a bit overwrought. But it's interesting, it didn't actually cause too much trouble until the policy, they developed flood maps so that these stones are all laid out in flood maps which are publicly available and promoted. There was absolute transparency, I think it's fair to say. So this was all in the 70s, early 80s, and the everything chugged along okay until it reached Western Sydney. And there was a meeting, as I said, they usually get 3 or 4 dozen people at the most. Over 1,000 people attended the meeting and they were angry. It became a political issue just before a state election. Of course, the policy was dumped by on talkback radio by the Premier at the time, who had a reputation for Teflon coating. And so the agencies were appeared to be caught flat-footed, but actually they'd been developing a much more sophisticated policy, which they, in a year or two, put forward as the merits-based approach. So this was much more acceptable, and it was accompanied by a handbook which was entitled the Floodplain Development Manual. So it appeared to be, at least this was the thing about development. It had public processes in the policy which were really pretty good, I think. Some would say this policy is still with us today, but it's been through so many changes, maybe it's unrecognisable. But I guess the fact is this came from the flood, and it was an attempt to address exposure. I think we all know, anyone who's got any interest in flooding, that unfortunately flood exposure continues to grow. I could make a quantitative statement about it. There was the feds got involved. They counted the houses that were flood prone in Australia at that time as 61,000 houses. Now there's that many in the Gold Coast. Thanks.
Thank you. It's incredible to hear that history. Thank you so much for taking us through that. And I know there are some people from Lismore at the forum, so I think they very much so appreciate your insights. Deb, over to you.
So the catalyst for our research was Black Saturday as well. Naomi has set out the parameters of that disaster, which I think, well, others think too, it's unprecedented in Australia's history in terms of loss of human life. Some of the women and men and non-binary people that we spoke to said that they looked around their communities and they didn't recognise them. And it wasn't just that whole communities were gone, it was that the nature of the community left was so different. So the Monday after Black Saturday, I remember we met in the front room of Women's Health Goulburn North East, where I was a researcher, And we didn't know what to do. We really wanted to help. So everyone went and called contacts that they knew in Mitchell Shire, Murrindindi Shire, which had Kinglake, Flowerdale, Marysville. And the word to us was, don't come here. We're inundated with volunteers and workers and everything is chaotic. You're just going to add to that. So we thought what we did at Women's Health was to document women's voices in a whole range of different issues. So we thought we would do a literature review to see what are women's experiences of disasters like this, catastrophic disasters internationally. And that literature review showed us that domestic violence, which I'm going to refer to as DV from now on, that domestic violence increases internationally. We also discovered that there was no published research about that. So I think what happened was when we were starting to do the interviews, which we started sort of 9 months later for disaster workers and community workers, and then after the first anniversary for people who were involved, the context was, what are you doing talking about gender? We've got a disaster on our hands. Claire Zara and I did the interviews, and the findings were really clear. 17 of the 30 women reported increased or new violence that they directly associated back to their male partner's experience in the fire. I want to give you a couple of quotes because I think we can really easily say domestic violence and not really understand what it can be. We focused on physical domestic violence because that's what is most persuasive to government in terms of funding. So one woman said, he was on edge and you could feel it so many times. He pushed me into the fridge, threw things at my son and threw my daughter. One time he took a knife and was threatening to kill us all. Yet women were silenced from speaking about domestic violence. Everybody said to them, can't you be a better wife, just be more supportive. From family right through to police, he's a good guy. Priorities were with heroic men or suffering men. And what the other priority was having the appearance of community cohesion and resilience, which others here on the panel will know is a very controversial word. The shock for us was the hostile response to our research and to us. It wasn't just denial. People were very angry. One person said, who are you coming into traumatised communities and adding to that trauma? The Kinglake newspaper quoted the CEO of the Regional Domestic Violence Service saying there was no increase in domestic violence, and in fact the women who participated in our research were simply aggrieved by the system. I remember writing that Australians will accept increased domestic violence after disasters in Haiti and Bangladesh, but nobody wants to hear that men who embody the spirit of resilient and heroic Australia are violent towards their families. We had 3 forums on the 2 days before the launch of the women's research, Benalla, Yea and Treasury Building in Melbourne. Every time, the first hands that went up, but what about the men? And they had just heard horrific stories like the quote that I just read out to you. So, long story short, we researched 32 men's experience of the disaster and again found gendered expectations harmed men, pushing them to protect and provide, which was the gendered expectation, and it led them to feelings of failure and despair. One man said to us, I haven't even told my wife this. Anyway, I came home and I was just sitting out in the car, nothing was built, and I just felt like hanging myself. Fast forward to Lismore, 2022. After the flood, DV reporting plummeted. Concern for women living with predators was coming from the local DV service, but roads were impassable, rental vehicles were impossible, outreach was untenable. So Kelly Bannister, the CEO of DV there, in desperation, tried to speak with the recovery coordinator, and she had to track him down. He was about to take off and deliver food, and she asked him to deliver DV pamphlets, and he said, "No, I'm delivering food. This is important recovery." It is important, but so is DV. The catalyst for influencing emergency management was reaction to the men's research launch. Senior leaders of the emergency sector were shocked by the depth of feeling about the men. Immediately after the launch, the Victorian Gender and Disaster Task Force was established. That led to the GEM, Gender and Emergency Management Guidelines, inclusion in various disaster policies handbooks, and ultimately the establishment of Gender and Disaster Australia. A few years ago, I heard a radio announcer giving the warnings about fire and saying, "We know domestic violence increases after disasters." So I knew then that we'd finally made a difference to how disasters are understood in this country. It's now accepted as a foreseeable disaster consequence. Domestic violence is no longer the hidden disaster it was in 2009.
Incredible legacy and research. Thank you so much, Debra. David, over to you. Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. All right, so when we talk about research or practice that has stood the test of time, what kind of time are we actually talking about? We're talking 5 years, 10 years, careers? Or are we willing to think about knowledge that's been tested over thousands of years? Because from an Indigenous perspective, knowledge isn't just old, it's living, it's adaptive, and it's continuously tested in practice. Now, in emergency management, we often point to major events as turning points, such as the ones that we've just heard. One of my case studies during university was on Tropical Cyclone Tracy in '74. The aftermath of this reshaped Australia's emergency management system, creating better building codes, stronger coordination, and more focus on preparedness. But it also developed or revealed something deeper. The impacts on Aboriginal communities wasn't fully recorded, and the cultural and social disruption they experienced was largely overlooked. So while systems improved technically, they didn't fully evolve in terms of knowledge that would inform it. And I still think that's a question we're grappling with today. Because disasters aren't just physical events. They're social, they're cultural and environmental, and they don't affect everyone equally. For many Indigenous communities, hazards like fire, flood and cyclone are not separate from the landscape. They're a part of country. When disasters occur, the impacts go beyond infrastructure. They affect connection to land, identity and continuity of culture. So what does this mean in practice? How should systems change? I think we're starting to see a shift with this already, but it's uneven. Take fire management, for example. There's a growing recognition that cultural burning can reduce fuel loads and help manage landscapes. But from an Indigenous perspective, that's not actually the primary objective. The purpose is to keep ecosystems healthy and maintain cultural and spiritual connection to country. Risk reduction becomes a byproduct. And that's a really important distinction, because if we create cultural burning as just another technical tool, we miss its value, which is governance, timing, responsibility, and intergenerational knowledge transfer. Another example is recovery. We've seen cases like evacuations during major flood events, where decisions were made to ensure safety, but without considering cultural consequences or protocols. This creates displacement or disconnection from country, disruption to community, and impacts on mental well-being. Those lessons were already visible decades ago, yet they are not always carried through into practice today. So if the lessons are there, what's missing? I don't think it's a lack of knowledge. Global frameworks already recognise the importance of Indigenous knowledge in disaster risk reduction. National inquiries also have acknowledged the value of Indigenous land and fire management. What's missing is implementation and, more importantly, authority. Are Indigenous communities being consulted, or are they being supported to lead? Because there's a big difference between engagement and shared decision making. This matters because resilience is not just about infrastructure. It's about trust. It's about identity, connection, and well-being. There's evidence that involvement in land management improves health outcomes, including reduced psychological distress and stronger connection to country. If we step back, I think the real shift we need is to move from hazard-focused thinking to place-based, country-centred resilience, from integrating knowledge to genuine partnerships between knowledge systems, because no single system has all the answers. And stronger outcomes happen when different ways of knowing are brought together deliberately and respectfully. Looking forward, that could mean a few practical changes: designing policies that are locally informed and co-developed, embedding Indigenous governance as part of core resilience systems, expanding how we define evidence to include long-standing place-based knowledge, and involving communities directly in decision-making. But ultimately, I think it comes to this. Cyclone Tracy showed us that disasters can transform systems, but the challenges we face now, especially with today's changes in climate, are asking more of us. The questions aren't just how do we improve our systems, but who are those systems built with and for? Because resilience in Australia won't come from a single policy, a single technology, or a single knowledge system. It will come from our ability to work together across systems, perspectives, and communities to understand risk more deeply and respond more effectively. So maybe the real question isn't whether knowledge has stood the test of time, maybe it's whether we're ready to listen to it properly and act on it differently. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those reflections, and wow, I did say it was a pretty top-notch panel, and I think that has rung true. I'm really looking forward to the next part, because we've looked backwards, we've looked at some of those really challenging policy areas or catastrophic moments in so many of your careers, but what I'd really like to do now is look forward. And what I want to ask is, what is the single most important thing the natural hazards field in Australia must act on, and what's at stake if we don't? So a pretty heavy question, not going to lie, but what's the single most important thing that the natural hazards field in Australia must act on, and what's at stake if we don't? So if we look forwards. And I might mix it up a little bit and just ask if we might just try and keep our answers maybe to around 3 or so minutes, so a smidgen shorter, just so that we can get to those Slido questions toward the end. But Naomi, I might start with you.
Okay, I could probably give you a few, but I won't. The provision of information and warnings to the community, which is hardly a new topic, but is absolutely vital, and things have changed. No more ads in the paper, obviously. So the number of sources people get their information from is it's both something really good for emergency services, but also quite the challenge, I think. It's linked to the issue of trust. And trust in authorities, as we all know, is taking a nosedive. And so I think they're trying to, keeping on building that trust is absolutely vital to going forward. And we know that we've known for ages that people need 2 or 3 sources of the same sort of information before they'll act on it. They'll get something, you've got to check, and then you check again. It might be a check on Facebook, check with somebody down the road. We've known that for a long time, and so that still has to be incorporated. And I would say stop anybody from defunding the ABC, because at the end of the day, that local ABC is an absolute lifesaver.
Thank you. I think that word trust has come up a few times and so important. Not to throw straight back to you, but David.
Yeah, so I think most importantly, it's about connection. From me to you, from us here on the panel. And it's how we build those relationships within that connection. If we're able to have that, responsibility held within ourselves to be able to touch base with each other, then I think we're going to put ourselves out on a limb for people. We'll have a responsibility for each other in a more a collaborative way. So I think for us, it's connection. Yeah.
Connection. Thank you. Greg, what about you? When you look forward, where do we need to focus our efforts?
Given my background as a research scientist, I'm interested in the adoption of all new technologies that are available to enable us to get better environmental intelligence for the building of resilience. Can I just have, this will take 30 seconds. There's a visual again rather than my words. I want to show you something.
Would like that.
There you go, water level. This is an ephemeral river which is normally just dirt in 140 kilometres east of Marble Bar. And there's a driver that tried to get through 2 metres of water across this road crossing. And you can see that the road train, and there's the driver at the back of his cabin in the little red thing, standing on top of the tray. And you can see the time up the top. It started at 8 o'clock in the morning. There he is again now, he's sitting on the top of the tray. Standing again, he's been there for 3 hours so far. He's in grave danger. And there's the police air wing helicopter that picked him up. That's enough, thanks. That's modern technology, 150 kilometres east of Marble Bar. There are 7 sites set up by Main Roads WA. It's a little company that I work for 2 days a week, Director of Research, provided a system that was autonomous, that sits there, measures all the weather variables the Bureau does, measures air pollution variables to get smoke if there's fire, has visual cameras and infrared cameras so it can detect fires, and also measures water height at 7 of these ephemeral river crossings in WA. That's just an example of what this incredible modern technology with measurements every minute in the middle of nowhere. It's brilliant. I'm not advertising a company, I'm advertising a technology. There's other people doing the same sort of thing. But for me, there are all sorts of benefits that we can have for providing the input information you need for forecasting, and information like this, which is during an event, that can help you manage the event.
Wow, that's incredible photos there. And a lot's at stake if we don't get that right. So thank you. John.
Okay, thank you. I don't think there's any one thing, unfortunately. Wouldn't it be wonderful if there was? There's a lot of things I'd like to say, but in the interest of my survival, I'm not going to. So I thought I'd just make a quick comment on what other people have been saying in the sort of commentariat out there. There's a lot of commentary from people who have just left the system in Australia and the UK about the seemingly declining focus of emergency management on its humanitarian mission. And I guess to essentialise it, what has been said is that people in the emergency management sector need to ensure that they have compassion for and empathy with and understanding of the suffering of the people that they're trying to support. I find this a bit disturbing that apparently there's a problem here. As I said, there's some very scathing assessments of that. Of course, it doesn't apply to most people, individuals, but it certainly seems to apply to the systems. And the implication of this is that without understanding of people and empathy, the people suspicious and trust falls away, and that reinforces it. There needs to be mutual respect and understanding from the people and the agencies and NGOs for the system to work effectively and to reduce the mental load on everybody. Thanks.
Fantastic, thank you. Deb, what about you? Oh, Russell. We said we'd spice things up. We'll move things around. Russell, over to you.
Right. I'm really impressed in the conference how academics and practitioners have worked together. But I have the feeling that nearly all the projects are quite small. And what I think we need to think about in Australia is some big projects. And just as an example, we learned a lot from COVID, but what did we learn from COVID that was good and what was bad about the next pandemic? Or what did we learn in that event that would inform us when eventually a geomagnetic storm occurs in Australia? Some really big picture project. Now, as an example, about 15 years ago, California developed a project called Shakeout, which was looking again at a magnitude 7.5 earthquake in San Francisco. And they also went on from there and developed another project called Arc Storm, which was looking at, in effect, a repeat of the 1861-1862 atmospheric rivers that affected California. And that project involved 117 scientists, practitioners, infrastructure providers, sociologists, etc. But a really big team of people under the lead of a geologist called Lucy Jones. But what it really did was bring the whole state together, thinking about one big project, and so that next time something happened, Joe Blow in Community A already knew Mrs. So-and-so in Community B. They knew how to work with them because they'd already published a 1,000-page report, all 117 of them, on a major project. And I would like to really see us think about some project like that. Geomagnetic storm would be a good one because sooner or later it will affect us, and we will perhaps discover all sorts of things we never knew. Thanks.
Thank you. And now, last but not least, Debra.
Thank you. That was a surprise. So, if we look at major social disruptions like climate change is, even if some people don't think so, disasters and war, women's rights and gender equity are often amongst the first things to go. Because of this, from my perspective, we need to really pay close attention to the social context of catastrophic disasters. I've turned to Black Saturday for that, just serendipitously really, but I think it's like Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans in 2005. Researchers in America continue to learn from that. They had the 20-year anniversary not long ago, and there's been, thousands of papers written, and including very recently. Here in this country, we found people say, oh, Black Saturday, done and dusted too long ago. But it was a different kind of disaster, and we need to learn from it in regard to human relations. In Australia, we do know for each disaster how many people died, how many houses and hectares burnt, how many species were lost, and the financial cost. Yet domestic violence data remains unknown, as does men's suicide data, and both are linked to gendered expectations. So I think what the sector could do is really look at gathering gender disaggregated data so that we can understand the differential effect to women, men and non-binary people. We have to keep returning to the research, replicating it and funding it. Such research and action, though, must be about power in gender relations, not about just raising awareness of gender. It's about the power in that. It's not solidarity, but system change to dismantle cultures that reward just one particular kind of masculinity. And it's also about changing the message away from valorising heroic men and cohesive, resilient communities, so that we're open, we're willing to listen to women speak about domestic violence. I think when we were talking about stay or go, we need really clear messaging about leaving early so that women can leave early without being accused of deserting their husband, so that men can leave early without being accused of deserting their communities or their local CFA, and without slurs like, "I thought you were more of a man than that." Some of the work has been done using the GEM guidelines in some places, but the progress is really uneven across Australia and highly dependent upon individuals to drive it. The lingering doubt for senior fire and emergency managers is the tension they feel between response and relief and recovery. At the height of a bushfires, I want firefighters to do their job. So what we're talking about is before a disaster and in the aftermath, and a lot of preparation can be done that way. So there's no doubt to me that gender determines disaster preparation, experience and legacy for people. But that expression about islands of excellence in a sea of mediocrity, I think that's what we've got with gender and disaster.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those excellent answers. We now have some time for Q&A, and we can do a bit of a hybrid, so we can take questions from the floor if there are any burning questions, and we have roving mics, but we also have some questions on Slido. But first I might just pop your hand up if there are any questions here. Otherwise, we might kick off. I think Lara might read out our first question from Slido. Thanks so much.
So our first question is from Michael Wassing. How do we conduct and apply today's research to keep pace with our preferred futures with an increasing speed of disruption, uncertainty and risk?
Who wants to tackle that one from Mike? Go for it.
I'll have a go at that. I think the issue here is to translate the potential that's offered by modern science and technology and computing, for example, into an understandable pathway for bureaucrats at all levels, and also for the general public and others. I mean, the insurance industry will adopt things really quickly if they think that it's going to give them more efficiency and effectiveness. We have to articulate, the scientific community has to articulate science in a manner that makes clear that it's going to generate all sorts of interesting and incredibly effective new ways of doing things that will mitigate risk, enable better understanding of emerging events, forecasting, and also better optimise the recovery and rebuilding and perhaps adaptation phases. I mean, you'd expect, I'm a working scientist, I'm just going to say that, but I don't think the scientific community's quite worked out across the board what it needs to do to be relevant my answer is that we need to learn to do that better. There are plenty of people here who are doing it, who are involved in this, but we're a small group compared to the many thousands around the country.
Thank you.
Can I just make a quick comment? Sorry. Looking back, which is really all I can do because I've been long retired, I can recall when the bushfire CRC was actually first, well, I'm not in the industry now, that's what I meant. The bushfire CRC was first mooted, and I can remember the heads of the fire services, not all of them, but a lot of them really struggled, I think, to see the point of all this money going into the research, and also the amount of time you actually sort of had to wait until you got something. It is so different now. And that, probably looking, I don't know, 20-something years, and it seems to me that's quite a short time to move. And I've come to this conference for this panel, and so it's the first time in 14 years I've actually sat listening to the research. But it's also supported by all the emergency management agencies and people up talking and so on. It seems to me that there really has been progression. At least at that level. I can't really attest for what's going on in the ground, but very, very different atmosphere.
Thank you. And John?
Thanks. Just referring to Greg. Greg's an optimist, and with science, which is good. Good there's someone. I suppose, I guess, taking what I think was the question or the comment, about the polycrisis, permacrisis, complex unbound events, cascading, etc., etc., etc. Our systems are not designed or ready for this. They tend to be focused on certainties, clearly bounded entities, events with clear starts, finish, lined responsibilities, all the rest of it. I think we need to have arrangements that, while not dispensing with what we've got, complement what we've got, that can embrace uncertainty and embrace all these ambiguities and vagueness, and because that's what's going to be needed. There's too many surprises out there for the systems relying on prediction to work any better than they are, and we could argue that when it comes to a major event, that's not perfect.
Indeed. Thank you. Do we have any other questions in the room? Otherwise, we might go over to Slido if there are any more, Lara.
So we've got another one from Ali Gallant. Greg mentioned the importance of information and Naomi of trust. In an age of more and more data from more and more actors, how do we ensure that knowledge remains robust, trusted and is used?
Who wants to tackle that one? Debra. Jump in, Deb.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that doing our research from a women's health service, women's health had a high level of trust, and I think it still does. So women were more interested to talk to us than a lot of other researchers, for example. The other thing we did was we said to them really clearly, because it had ethics approval too, but we said at any stage, you know, if you want your information changed or taken out altogether, just let us know. And a lot of women did that because of the repercussions that they were having against them. They did that with their own transcript. When we wrote the report, they had a look at it again and said, look, you haven't used my words properly, you need to change it. And we invited them to the launches. We had some of the women speak. And I think that, and the men too, and I think that's a really good way for researchers to gain trust, to do that and keep checking in.
Thank you. Any other comments on trust and data? Greg?
I think that issue requires us to be very open and transparent. And if information is being used to in any way affect the way that we behave in terms of responding to natural disasters, then we just need to make sure that we don't accept things at face value, but we always ask questions about it. And it just requires independent review. A lot of that happens in NHRA. It's really important. The fact that this forum's here and there's a group of some 100 people listening to what's going on. So the information here is being tested by a range of knowledgeable people. We shouldn't accept things that appear to have a doctrinaire or philosophical underpinning in politics or other particular areas. We should just make sure that the information is widely available, readily testable, and there's nothing hidden, that the processes involved are all open and transparent. That's all I would aim for. I think that's one of the objectives of the scientific community, not always met, but in fact being open and transparent and providing all the information that sits behind whatever piece of knowledge you're using to craft a decision.
The only thing I'd add to that, I think people are very appreciative if they're told or is explained when things actually go wrong, because they do a fair bit in our world. And really, well, this didn't work with, we tried to do this and this happened and, so on. And I think most people really appreciate that, so that they're not taken as fools.
Do we have any other questions from the field down here? Amanda?
Thank you so much to everyone for your really insightful information that you've shared today. You've all spoken around the catalysing impact of crisis or disasters. There's growing evidence about the importance of investing ahead of an event, reducing disaster risk, actually lowering the impact and the cost for communities. But it's very difficult to actually invigorate the same level of catalysation around change when you're talking about prevention or mitigation actions. Really interested in your thoughts on how we can capitalise on some of that change energy to really start to have a conversation around investment in reducing disaster risk, rather than how do we more effectively respond to the crisis when it happens.
Great question. Mitigation, investment.
I was thinking about, I was watching a presentation at a disaster conference in Australia, and they had a big subdivision new estate sign that was 2/3 of the way up covered with floodwater. So developers were trying to sell these blocks, the water 2/3 of the way up. So I followed it up later and said, what's happened with that subdivision? And they said, no, it's still going ahead. And I think I was saying earlier to Ainsley that after the bushfires at Kinglake, the government bought back some of the blocks that were up against the forest. 5 or 10 years later, they're back on the market. And Caroline from Tasmania said she's been doing research right now with 1,800 people filling in a survey. So what they said is that she compared it to one 5 years earlier, that they're more confident now than they were 5 years ago. And we both think that's because they've forgotten what it was like in the floods.
Can I just say that John reminded me yesterday that we were ready to review the prepare, stay and defend or leave early policy before the fires and got overtaken. There was, after every fire, there's always, every event I would say, but I was involved in fires. One of the things though, thinking on it, I'm sure we would not have got anywhere near where we got with messaging, warning systems, refuges, evacuation, all of that, without the huge oomph of the Royal Commission, followed up with a lot of money from the in that case, the Victorian state government, but all the other states said, thank God it wasn't us, and they just got on and did it. So it was that huge impetus that actually gave the big change.
Thanks, Naomi. And Russell? Russell?
I'm pretty cynical about bringing about change. I think the only time that it's really going to be effective is to bring in change immediately after a disaster, which affects a lot of people, so they're concentrated on it. And if you want to do that, you have to be prepared for that change, to make that change before the disaster occurs. And I can remember a Californian political scientist, Peter May, telling me years ago about the 1994 earthquake in San Francisco. In the 6 months after that earthquake, the California state legislature passed more than 180 pieces of legislation that affected various things related to the earthquake. In the second 6 months after the earthquake, they passed none. In other words, you have to be prepared. You have to have in your bottom drawer the changes that you want made ready before the disaster. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere.
It's really interesting in the sense that sometimes you need to strike while the iron's hot and make that change in the moment, and just reflecting on some of the answers around land use planning, certainly some sticky issues that we've got. A question up the back.
Hi. Everyone's talked about the impact after the events. I'd like to talk about the impact of technology and in particular AI, because we're talking about knowledge. So I'd be interested to hear from the panel what they think are the opportunities, but also some of the things as a sector that we might need to be mindful of moving forward with those types of technologies.
AI, who wants to tackle AI? Debra, jump on in. No one's jumping at the other microphone, so the floor is yours.
Okay. I just think that AI makes so many mistakes, like really, really clear mistakes. So I wouldn't be investing a whole lot into it until we're sure that it's not going to make those mistakes. You have to tell it that you want accurate answers. So that's all I had to say.
That's great. Go for it, Greg.
I just make a comment on that. AI is unstoppable. There's no way it's going to stop. The fastest computers in the US are 200 times faster than our national computational infrastructure, and have huge, hundreds of times the amount of storage where all the information is stored that's used by AI. It is something we will have to engage with. What we need to do is to make sure that we have trusted people who understand AI at the technical level, who are able to help us understand the value and parse the difference between bad advice by AI. And I know about that because I use it for writing computer code, and often it's very buggy, and just the logic isn't right. But it is very, very good. Nobody I know who writes computer code does so on their own anymore. It's just, you can get most of it done, 95% of it, and you're fixing the AI's bugs, not your own bugs. I can write bugs myself, of course. But the reality is it's here. It's just like we went from slide rules. I brought one to show you what a floating point operation calculator was back in the day, before computing. Now we're talking about computers that do 2 times 10 to the 18 floating point operations a second. AI is leveraging off that. It's not going to go away. It's only going to get bigger. So we have to come up with a governance framework that helps us understand what's good and what isn't. There's a bit of background here. I've just got off the board of the National Computational Infrastructure. I chaired the board for that, one of Australia's 2 supercomputers for 2 terms. So I know a bit about it, but I'm being very general here. It is coming. I mean, it's already here. We just have to make sure we embrace the governance around it that people are trying to develop. It's like anything that's happening really quickly. The governance often comes after the fact. We've got to try and get the governance ahead of the fact.
Governance ahead of the fact is a really good way to put it. May I just ask you what's your prop that you mentioned you've got there?
Do any of you know what this is? It's a slide rule. When I went to secondary school in 1962, so I'm a bit old, there were no calculators, there was nothing electronic, and the way in which we did calculations on numbers that weren't whole numbers was to use a 4-figure log table, take logs, add and subtract them, and then anti-log them, or use the slide rule. If anybody wants to see how to use a slide rule, I can do 1 calculation a second. And to be as fast as the fastest computer in the world, you'd need 2 times 10 to the 18 Gregs with their slide rules.
So we might test you out on that, because at the end of this session, I'm going to invite everyone upstairs to the exhibition hall for the networking function, and I think everyone should test Greg out on his calculation skills. So there you go. That would only happen at a science or research event. Yeah, jump in, David.
So really good question, Celeste. Look, I think the reason why I shake my head with regards to AI is there's risk there. And that risk is it's dumbing us down. We're relying on an electronic tool to be able to create, you know, our sense of place, our sense of being, and I think we need to really understand that risk, and you know, that comes back to what I was talking about before with regards to connection. If we keep, you know, going in leaps and bounds into AI, then we're going to lose the connection that we have to each other. So there's very real risk there, and I agree with Greg. If there's controls, and you know, if we can put some of that stuff in place, I think it's probably too late now, but if we can put some measures in place, then you know, we've got a capable tool. But yeah, there's some very real risk there.
Yeah, can I just add, I think one of the risks is that it's coded by people, and it's coded, to my way of thinking, reflecting the status quo socially. So it's sexist, you know, and it assumes that it's a he quite often. And I can see that you can get data on lots of things, but often not related to violence against women, for example. So it's really different to that technical ability and social issues.
Indeed. We probably have time for... Oh, Russell, jump on in.
I think everybody should check out AI for themselves. Think of a topic that you really know a hell of a lot about and ask ChatGPT or some other platform to answer a question about it. And then you'll find out how much you can trust. There's an island in Papua New Guinea called Long Island, and probably half of the things that have been written about Long Island I wrote. Doesn't mean they're right. But I asked AI a question about Long Island, and half of the answer is fair enough, whether I wrote it or not, and the rest of it is absolute crap. And I have no idea where it came from. Maybe 1% of the population in the world would be able to identify that crap. Maybe another 5% would be suspicious about it. But the rest of the population, you just believe it, because you don't know. Another example, I tried, because I was writing some stories from grandkids, I wanted a map from the 1960s of between 2 towns in New Zealand, and yeah, I got a good map from Microsoft, from Copilot, and all of the towns are in the wrong order. I've got the one at the north right and the one at the south right, but all the ones in between are in exactly the wrong order. Now, who would know that unless you happen to be there in 1960?
Greg?
Just another comment about AI, and I said governance. I'm not a fan of AI just blasting out there. I worry about it. I've been close enough to it to see what it can do and can't do. What I've said is it's inevitable. One example is the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasts, the best forecasting centre in globally. A year ago released an AI forecast, not using the computer model solving the differential equations and the physics, but AI. And testing that we did at the NCI showed that an AI model trained on the same amount of information that's used to run a standard forecast, 6-hour forecast model 50 times, so you can take an average and work out probability, so just slightly different initial conditions. It could produce wind forecasts 48,000 times faster. So in the space of seconds, once it's trained, it could do things that solving each equation at every grid point in the globe would take tens of thousands of times more. So it's not going to go away because it's incredibly efficient for some things. The issue for me, I'll come back to it, it's governance. It's actually having a method. And CSIRO a while ago, I don't know where it's gone to now, set up a group in CSIRO, decided they'd set up a group that would parse information to determine the signature of AI behind the written information. Now, I don't know how far they've gotten, whether the AI system's going to work out how to get around them, but people are absolutely working. We need to know who they are and just make sure that we do our absolute damnedest, because it will assimilate cultural knowledge. The lot. I mean, you know, it is a big deal. It's a really big deal.
Indeed. I originally was going to ask for one more question, but turns out our panel did have a lot to say on AI, which is wonderful, and I really appreciated that. And I think I might take some of that back to my organisation tomorrow. Wow, what an incredible panel. I listened to each and every one of those words, and as someone who currently works in emergency management here in South Australia, we have a range of challenges, have had significant events just over this most recent summer. We know we have more on their way, novel events. We work very collaboratively across this country with many of you, and I know there's so much coming to us in the future. And to listen to all of the learnings, all of the efforts that you have put in, all of the insights that you continue to contribute to this field. I feel very fortunate to be a beneficiary of the work that you have done and are continuing to do. And I thank you very much for taking the time to be with all of us today. So please join me in thanking our panel. Now, Andrew, I think I might be handing back over to you. So thank you very much for having us here today. I believe I was meant to mention that we're heading upstairs again for that exhibition hall. I just really want everyone to test Greg, so I just wanted to mention it again. But Andrew, over to you. Thank you.
I'll keep my updates for the day fairly sweet. Firstly, thanks to our very illustrious panel. It's almost like the panel of the century that we've accumulated up here. So well done, everybody. Great job. And thank you to Hannah as well. So really good. Hey, we've got so much good stuff on tomorrow. Really looking forward to our panel session with our international keynote speaker from the Insurance Institute of Business and Home Safety, Faraz Hadidi. That'll be great, and the panel that'll follow that, as well as all the other research presentations in the morning as well. As Hannah said, we're upstairs tonight for the networking function, so that will be really great. And again, we're going to finish, I think, at 8 o'clock, I see, tonight, so not 7, 8, so you can stick around for an extra drink or two tonight if you wish to do so. Again, watch the narrow pathway on the way home. I'll always keep on reminding everybody of that. Now, we're back here at 9 o'clock in the morning, so really looking forward to seeing you there. I do have a small gift that I'll give each one of our panellists tonight as well. We don't need to do official presentations on stage, but let you know that I will do that on our behalf as well. So have a great night. We'll see you back here in the morning.